I was 29 at the time, and I had moved into a house in a suburb in Indiana at the beginning of that year. I work in IT, and I was leaving an apartment to finally live alone in a house. It was a very quiet neighborhood. Wide streets, similar houses, the kind of place where almost nothing happens. The house already had an alarm system installed by the previous owner, and the realtor mentioned that it was working normally. I didn't pay much attention at first. I figured I would set it up properly later. On moving day, everything was rushed, unloading boxes, organizing the basics, so I ended up leaving the system as it was. On the first night, I was exhausted. It was almost midnight when I went to sleep. The house was still a bit messy, boxes scattered around, some furniture out of place. I remember thinking I'd sort everything out the next day. I turned off the downstairs lights and went up to the bedroom. I didn't touch the alarm system, didn't set any code, didn't try to activate anything. To me, it wasn't even in use yet. I lay down and fell asleep quickly without thinking much. I woke up abruptly to a sound too loud to ignore. It was the house alarm, that kind of continuous piercing sound that seems to fill everything. It took me a few seconds to understand where I was because I woke up disoriented. I grabbed my phone from the bedside table and checked the time, 2:14 a.m. My heart was already racing from the shock, and my first thought was that someone had tried to break in. I stayed in bed for a few seconds, just listening to the alarm echoing throughout the house. Then I got up quickly and left the bedroom, going downstairs carefully, trying to hear anything beyond the alarm. I didn't hear glass breaking, didn't hear a door opening, nothing, just the alarm itself. When I reached the lower floor, I went straight to the panel on the wall near the main entrance. The screen was on, showing a message I didn't expect. Disarmed manually. That didn't make sense, because if it was disarmed, why was the alarm going off? I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the panel, trying to understand what it meant. The alarm was still blaring loudly, so I started pressing buttons instinctively, trying to silence it. After a few inputs, it finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse because the whole house became completely quiet. I stood there listening, waiting for any sound of movement, any sign that someone was still inside. But there was nothing. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. I started checking the house. First, the front door, locked. Then the windows, one by one, all closed. I went to the back door, also locked. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. As I did this, the feeling that something didn't add up kept growing, because the alarm had no reason to go off if nothing had been opened. And that message on the panel, disarmed manually, stayed in my mind. After checking everything, I went back to the panel more calmly. The alarm was silent now, but the screen still showed some information. That's when I saw the event history option. I didn't even know it had that, but I started navigating through the menus, trying to understand what had happened. When I opened the history, the first line immediately stood out. It showed exactly 2:13, system disarmed manually, and right below, 2:14, alarm triggered. That made no sense at all, because I had been asleep at that time. I hadn't gone downstairs, hadn't touched the panel, hadn't done anything. And the strangest part was still to come. When I opened the details of that event, I saw that the system indicated the disarm had been done with a valid code. It wasn't an error, it wasn't a malfunction. It was a correct code, and I hadn't even set one yet. At that moment, I tried to find a logical explanation. I thought maybe the default code was still active, something the previous owner used that hadn't been reset. That made some sense, at least superficially. But even then, someone would have had to enter that code on the panel, and I was alone in the house. That didn't explain who had done it. I stood there staring at the panel, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just turn everything off and go back to sleep, pretending it was just a system error. But another part wouldn't let me, because it didn't feel like just any error. I looked around the living room, trying to see anything out of place. The shadows looked different now. The house felt quieter than before in an uncomfortable way. That's when a thought came very clearly. Someone could have been inside the house while I was sleeping. The moment that thought hit me, my body reacted immediately. That sense of safety I had from being inside my own home just disappeared. I started looking at every corner more carefully. Not just doors and windows, but the spaces between furniture, the hallway, even the bottom of the stairs. Everything looked normal, but at the same time, nothing felt completely reliable. I stood there for a few seconds, completely still, trying to hear any sign of presence. That's when I heard a very faint sound coming from upstairs. It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was enough. It sounded like a small shift, like someone placing their foot carefully on the floor. I froze instantly. My eyes went straight to the staircase. The sound didn't repeat immediately, but the fact that it had happened was enough to break any attempt to rationalize it as a technical error. If someone was upstairs, I had walked right past them when I came down. I stood there for a few seconds staring at the stairs, unable to decide what to do. Going upstairs felt like the worst possible idea at that moment. My phone was in my pocket, but I didn't even think about calling anyone. My mind was focused on trying to confirm whether that sound had been real. And then it came again. A second step, very light, but this time clearer. It wasn't wood creaking on its own. It had weight, it had intention. I slowly stepped back without taking my eyes off the staircase until I reached the wall near the front door. My breathing was short, controlled, trying not to make noise. I thought about just leaving the house right then, going to the car and driving away. But at the same time, it felt absurd to abandon everything there. That's when I looked at the alarm panel again and noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the panel screen, besides the history, there was an option showing the status of the house zones. Doors, windows, and internal sensors. One of them was marked motion detected upper floor. The update was from just seconds ago. That confirmed it completely. It wasn't just in my head. There was something upstairs, and the system was registering it in real time. I stared at that for a moment that felt too long. And then suddenly the panel changed again. A new line appeared in the history. System disarmed manually. Again, with no sound of typing, no one visible. Just the update appearing on the screen. My whole body tensed instantly, because that meant that whoever was upstairs had access to the system and knew exactly how to use it. At that moment, I didn't think about anything except getting out. I opened the front door as quietly as I could and stepped outside, feeling the cold early morning air hit me all at once. I didn't look back immediately. I just went to the car, unlocked it, and got in quickly, locking everything from the inside. Only when I was sitting there, my hands still slightly shaking, did I look at the house. All the lights were off. No visible movement through the windows. Everything looked completely normal, as if nothing had happened. But as I watched, the light from the alarm panel inside turned on again, visible through the living room window. And a few seconds later, it turned off, as if someone had just interacted with it again. I stayed inside the car for a few minutes trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to leave immediately. Just get out and never come back. But at the same time, all my belongings were inside the house. I ended up starting the car, but I didn't leave right away. I just sat there looking at the house, waiting to see any clearer movement. Nothing happened. No lights turned on, no door opened. Just silence. After a while, I called the police. I explained the situation as clearly as possible, trying not to sound too confused. They took a while to arrive, but when they did, they went inside the house with me. They searched everything. Every room, every closet, every space. They didn't find anyone. No signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. Just the alarm system, which according to them showed no errors at all. After they left, I stayed inside for a few minutes, trying to decide whether to spend the night there or not. The house felt normal again, quiet with no sign that anyone had been there. Even so, the feeling didn't go away. I went upstairs carefully, checking everything along the way, and when I entered the bedroom, I stopped immediately. The closet door was open. I was sure I had left it closed. Nothing was messed up, nothing was out of place. Just the door open. And inside, my belongings exactly as I had arranged them earlier. That somehow was worse than anything else, because it didn't look like someone had been searching for something. It looked like someone had just touched things. I slowly closed the closet door, and that night I didn't sleep there. I grabbed a few things and went to a friend's house. To this day, I've never used that alarm system again, and I've never been able to explain how it was disarmed with a code I never set. Story 2. I'm 31 years old, and I live alone in a very quiet residential neighborhood in Wisconsin. I work as a nurse, so I do a lot of night shifts, usually getting home between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I'm already used to this routine, to the silence of the street at that hour, and to coming home when everything is completely still. My house has a closed garage directly connected to the kitchen by an internal door. I always enter through there, almost automatically. That night didn't seem any different from the others. I got home around 3:20 a.m., tired as usual. I drove into the garage, closed the automatic door, and turned off the engine. I grabbed my bag, got out, and before going inside, I did my usual quick check. I looked at the back seat more out of habit than concern. There was nothing there. Everything was normal. I locked the car with the remote, heard the click, and went into the house, closing the internal door behind me. I turned on only the kitchen light and set my things down on the counter. I was taking off my shoes when I heard the sound. It was sharp, quick, like something hitting a hard surface. It clearly came from the garage. It wasn't distant or muffled, it was direct, like it came from inside the car. I froze instantly with one of my shoes still in my hand. I stood there trying to figure out if it could have been something falling inside the house, but no. It had come from the garage. And it didn't sound like something small. It sounded intentional. I stayed completely still for a few seconds, just listening. My heart was already racing, and I started paying attention to any other sound that could confirm what I had heard. And then, the car shifted slightly. Not a loud noise, but that small movement that makes the suspension react, like when someone gets in or moves inside it. That was enough to remove any doubt. Something was happening there. I stared at the door leading to the garage, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, pretend it was something in the car, like an object shifting, but I knew it wasn't that. I had just gotten out of it. There was nothing loose inside that could cause that kind of impact, and the movement, that wouldn't happen on its own. My breathing became shallow, and I felt that cold sensation rising in my stomach. After a few seconds, I slowly approached the door. I didn't touch it immediately. I just stood there with my hand near the handle, trying to hear something from the other side. Silence, complete. No movement, no sound. That almost made me doubt what I had heard, but the feeling didn't go away. I took a deep breath, grabbed the handle, and opened the door. As soon as the door opened, the garage was dark, with only a bit of light coming from the kitchen behind me. The car was there, exactly where I had left it. For a second, everything seemed normal, but then I noticed something that didn't add up. The car was still slightly moving. It wasn't a strong motion, but you could see a subtle shift, like it had just finished swaying. That made my body freeze immediately. I stood at the doorway, not fully stepping into the garage. My eyes were fixed on the car, trying to catch any detail out of place. I couldn't see anyone inside. The windows were dark because of the lack of light, but even so, there was no visible silhouette, no movement. Just that final slight adjustment of the suspension, like something had really moved inside seconds earlier. I reached out and turned on the garage light. The brightness filled the space instantly, and my eyes went straight to the inside of the car. The front seats were exactly as I had left them. The steering wheel, the dashboard, everything normal. But when I looked at the back seat, my stomach dropped instantly. The rear seat was reclined, not fully, but tilted forward like someone had pulled it. I never used that. Never. I can't even remember the last time I touched that lever. And not only that, the rear passenger side door was unlocked. I always lock all the doors when I go inside. Always. That didn't make any sense. I stood there looking at it for a few seconds, trying to find a simple explanation. Maybe I had forgotten to lock that specific door. Maybe I had bumped the seat without noticing before getting out. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I had looked at the back seat before leaving the car. I remembered that clearly, and it had been normal. I took a step into the garage very slowly, still staring at the car. Every movement felt louder than usual in that silence. I approached from the side, trying to see better into the back seat. There was no one. No bag, no strange object. Just the seat tilted forward as if someone had adjusted it seconds earlier. I got closer to the rear door and stopped beside it. I didn't touch it immediately. I just looked inside the car, trying to notice any detail I might have missed. Everything seemed too quiet now, like nothing had happened. But that feeling wouldn't go away. It was like something had been there seconds before, and simply wasn't anymore. That's when I noticed something else. The rear seatbelt was pulled out, slightly extended, not fully retracted like it normally is. That doesn't happen on its own. Someone has to pull it. I felt a cold wave run through my entire body in that moment. Because it wasn't just the reclined seat or the unlocked door, it was several small signs of recent use. Like someone had been there, inside the car, while I was already inside the house. I took another step back without really realizing it, creating distance from the car. My mind was no longer trying to explain it logically. I just wanted to get out of there. Even so, I couldn't turn my back immediately. I kept staring into the interior, waiting. I don't even know what for. A movement, a sound, anything that would confirm it wasn't just my imagination. And then very subtly, I heard a small click coming from inside the car. It wasn't loud. It was that dry sound of plastic or metal snapping into place, like something adjusting in the seat or the belt. My whole body reacted instantly. I felt a sharp chill run up my spine, and without thinking, I turned and quickly went back into the house, pulling the garage door shut behind me. As soon as I closed it, I locked it and leaned against it, trying to control my breathing. My heart was racing and I couldn't stop thinking about that sound. I stood in complete silence, listening, waiting for any other noise from the garage. And then it came. A light impact, like something hitting the inside of the car again. I slowly stepped away from the door, not taking my eyes off it. Part of me wanted to leave the house right then, just go and never look back, but I didn't move. I grabbed my phone with a trembling hand, thinking about calling someone. But before I could do anything, I heard another sound. Lighter this time. Not from inside the car, but from the garage door itself, like someone had touched it from the other side. I froze in place. It wasn't a strong knock, it wasn't someone trying to force the door. It was just contact. A light touch, followed by a small shift, like someone had leaned their weight against it from the other side. I hadn't heard footsteps approaching before that. I hadn't heard anything from the garage besides the sounds from the car. It didn't make sense. I stared at the door, waiting to see the handle move anything. But nothing happened. Just silence again, a heavy silence thicker than before. I took another step back without realizing it, trying to keep distance. My mind was already going to the worst-case scenario, trying to understand how someone could be inside the garage without me seeing or hearing them before. I stood there for a few seconds, completely still, just listening. And then, a sound I didn't expect. A more defined click coming from the door. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, like someone had tested the handle from the outside. My stomach turned instantly, because that meant one very simple thing. If someone was there, that person knew exactly where I was. I didn't think anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately, trying to speak as quietly as possible. As I explained the situation, I didn't take my eyes off the door. And at one moment, when I paused to listen to the operator, I heard one last sound from the garage, something moving away, very faint, like restrained footsteps going toward the back of the space. After that, I didn't hear anything else. No movement, no sound from the garage, just silence. I stayed on the call, still staring at the door, waiting for anything to happen again. The police took a few minutes to arrive, but to me it felt much longer. When they got there, they entered through the house and then went into the garage. They opened the door carefully, already alert, and turned on the lights. They searched everything, the car, the corners of the garage, even the space behind some boxes I had there. They found no one. No signs of forced entry, no broken doors. But the rear seat was still reclined, the seatbelt still pulled, and the rear door still unlocked. To this day, I have no explanation for that. I know what I saw before going inside. I know what I heard afterward. And what bothers me the most isn't even the fact that someone had been inside the car. It's the idea that this person may have been there, hidden in silence, while I was already inside the house just a few feet away. Story 3. I was 22 at the time and lived on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia. A coworker of mine, Marcus, had just moved into an old house in one of the older neighborhoods in the city, the kind with narrow streets, large trees, and wooden houses that had clearly gone through many renovations. I didn't know that area very well, but he was excited about the move and had invited me over early in the evening, mostly to check out the place and help carry some of the remaining boxes. I was in a pretty busy phase of life, working all day and trying to save money, so this kind of simple visit was practically the only way I still socialized. That day I left straight from work, stopped at home just to change clothes, and then went there. I remember it was already getting dark when I entered that street, and the streetlights were dim, kind of yellowish, giving everything that old look the neighborhood already had naturally. His house was on a corner, with a small front porch and a side entrance through a narrow concrete passage. He had texted me saying he was in the back bringing some things from the car, and that if I got there first I could come in through the side door because it would be unlocked. That seemed normal. I parked on the street, checked my phone, replied to a quick message, and walked toward the side of the house, not thinking about anything other than going in and saying hi. The side passage was tight, with the wall of the house on one side and a tall wooden fence on the other, which already made it darker than the street. There were some dry leaves on the ground and a faint smell of damp wood, the kind you get in older houses, especially at the end of the day. When I reached the door, I saw it was indeed just resting against the frame. I didn't hear a TV, didn't hear voices or footsteps from inside, but I assumed Marcus was in the backyard or carrying something from the garage. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, calling his name in a normal voice, not shouting. The inside of the house was a bit messy, as expected from someone who had just moved. Some boxes against the wall, a lamp on the floor, a rug rolled up in a corner. The light that was on came mostly from the kitchen and a small hallway, so the rest of the house sat in a strange in-between of light and shadow. As soon as I took 2 steps in, I heard the door slam shut behind me very hard. It wasn't a normal light closing from the wind. It was a sharp, heavy slam, loud enough to echo through the kitchen and make me turn immediately. At that same moment, I felt that physical jolt, that shock in your chest that comes before any rational thought. I went straight to the handle to open it again, more out of reflex than necessity, and that's when I realized it wouldn't turn. It was locked in my hand, completely stiff, like it had been locked from the outside the exact moment I walked in. I pulled the handle harder, trying to turn it again, but it wouldn't budge. It wasn't like a normal stuck door. There was no give, no partial movement. It was completely locked. I tried pushing it too, thinking it might have closed in a strange way, but it didn't help at all. At that moment, my first reaction was to think the lock was defective, something common in old houses. Even so, the way the door had slammed wouldn't leave my mind. That didn't feel like just wind. I pressed my ear against the wood for a second, trying to hear if there was someone outside, but I heard absolutely nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no sign of movement, just silence. I took a step back, still looking at the door, trying to figure out what to do. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened my conversation with Marcus to text him, asking exactly where he was. As I typed, I noticed my hands were slightly tense, like my body was already reacting before I understood why. I sent something simple, like, "I'm inside, I'm in the kitchen," and waited for him to reply. That's when I heard the sound from upstairs, a step. Light but clear enough not to be mistaken for the house settling. I lifted my head immediately, looking toward the staircase at the end of the hallway. I stood completely still, waiting to hear it again. The sound came again. Another step. It wasn't loud, it wasn't running, but it had weight. It had a rhythm, like someone walking slowly on the wooden floor upstairs. At first I thought it could be Marcus. Maybe he had entered through the front without me noticing. That made sense for a second, but then something didn't fit. I hadn't heard the front door open nor footsteps coming down before, and the way the sound came, it didn't feel like someone moving normally through the house. I kept staring at the staircase, waiting to see someone appear. Nothing, just the partially lit hallway and the stairs leading up into darkness. The sound stopped again. That created an even stranger silence, as if whoever was upstairs had realized I was listening. I felt my heart start to race a little more and began thinking whether I should go up or not. Part of me wanted to resolve it quickly, just go up there and confirm it was Marcus, but another part wouldn't let my body move. I took a step toward the hallway very slowly, still staring at the stairs. My body was tense in a way I wasn't used to. Every movement felt too calculated, like any noise might draw attention. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. I didn't go up. I just stood there looking up, trying to see something in the darkness. There was no light on upstairs, so I could only make out the shape of the steps and part of the hallway above. That's when I heard another step, but this time, closer to the top of the stairs. That made me step back automatically. I felt a cold sensation run through my entire body, the kind that doesn't come from a sudden scare, but from realizing something isn't right. I looked at my phone again, expecting a reply from Marcus. Nothing yet. And the silence returned once more, heavy, like someone had stopped on purpose. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to decide if I should call his name out loud. My throat even prepared to speak, but I couldn't. Something about the situation made it feel like making noise wasn't a good idea. I took another step back, moving out of the direct line of the stairs, but without taking my eyes off them. The air inside the house felt heavier, more closed, like the silence itself had weight. Then I heard something different. Not a step this time. A soft sound, like wood creaking under weight, but more dragged out. Like someone had shifted their position upstairs without actually walking. That made me think of someone standing in the hallway, maybe near the top of the stairs, listening too. I felt my breathing become shorter and gripped my phone tighter, as if that would help in some way. I looked at my phone again, and that's when Marcus's message came through. It was simple. I'm at the store, I'll be there in about 10 minutes. Everything froze in that moment. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to process it, because it meant something very direct. It wasn't him upstairs. There was no one else who was supposed to be in that house. My body reacted instantly. I felt that cold hit harder, almost like a shock, and I took 2 more steps back, completely moving away from the hallway. My focus returned to the side door. I needed to get out. I went to it quickly, not running, but fast enough that I didn't want to stay there a second longer. I grabbed the handle again and tried to turn it. This time it turned. No resistance, no effort, like it had never been locked. The door opened immediately with a normal, quiet motion. That gave me a strange feeling because just seconds before it had been completely rigid in my hand. I didn't stop to think. I just pushed the door open, stepped into the side passage, and pulled it shut behind me from the outside. As soon as I got out, the air felt different, lighter. I took a few steps away from the door and stopped, trying to hear if any sound was coming from inside the house. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no sign that anyone was inside. I stood there for a few seconds on the side of the house, looking at the closed door, trying to decide if I should go back in or just wait for Marcus to arrive. Part of me still wanted to believe it had been some kind of misunderstanding, some normal noise from an old house that I had misinterpreted. But his message didn't leave much room for doubt. He wasn't there. I stepped farther away and went to the front of the house, where the street lighting was slightly better. I leaned against my car and kept looking at the entrance, trying to see if any light would turn on inside or if someone would appear in a window. Everything remained completely still. The house looked empty again, just like before I had gone in. I stood there waiting, watching the house, trying to catch any small change. The minutes felt longer than they actually were. At one point, I thought about walking around the house and trying to look through the windows, but something held me back. I didn't want to get close again without Marcus being there. It didn't make sense to go back in alone after what had happened. A few minutes later, I saw his car turning onto the street. When he parked and got out, I went straight to him. I must have looked off because he immediately asked if something had happened. I explained briefly, told him about the door, the footsteps upstairs, trying not to sound exaggerated. He gave a small laugh at first, thinking it might just be the house settling, that common explanation for old places. But when we went to the side of the house together and he tried to open the same door, it didn't open. He turned the handle several times with force and nothing. Story 4. I'm 34 years old and live alone in Dallas. I work in remote technical support, so I spend most of my time inside the apartment. My routine is very predictable. Work, dinner, watch something, and go to sleep. I've never been the type to sleep with the TV on. On the contrary, I always turn everything off before going to bed, because any light or sound bothers me. My apartment is small, just 1 bedroom, with the living room connected to the kitchen. Nothing special. It's in an older building, but well-maintained, in a quiet neighborhood. I've never had issues with noise, neighbors, anything. That night was a normal Wednesday. I had finished work later than usual, ate something quick, and spent some time on my phone on the couch. Around midnight, I turned off the TV with the remote, checked that the door was locked, something I always do, and went to the bedroom. The living room was left in darkness, just the usual late-night dark. I lay down and fell asleep quickly, nothing unusual happening. There was no sound from the street, no strong wind, nothing noticeable. It was a normal night until it wasn't. I woke up in a strange way. It wasn't a sudden scare, it was more like something had pulled me out of sleep. At first, I didn't even know what was happening. I spent a few seconds trying to understand. That's when I noticed the sound. A constant static noise like a TV with no signal. Loud, too loud to have just started. I stayed lying there, staring at the ceiling, trying to reason if that made sense. Because I clearly remembered turning the TV off before going to sleep. I got up slowly and went to the living room. The light was still off, but the glow from the TV illuminated everything with that flickering black and white pattern. When I walked in, I saw the screen filled with static. No channel, no image, just that noise. And the volume was high, not at maximum, but loud enough to echo through the entire apartment. That bothered me immediately, but what really made me stop was realizing something. That sound had already been loud before I woke up. It didn't feel like it had just turned on. It felt like it had been like that for a while. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the TV. trying to understand if it could have been some electrical issue, some kind of interference. I grabbed the remote from the coffee table and pressed the power button. Nothing happened. I pressed it again, closer to the TV, thinking maybe it was the batteries. Still nothing. That's when I stepped closer, reaching out to press the button directly on the device. When I got close enough, something on the screen changed for a moment. It wasn't a smooth transition. It was like a quick cut. The static disappeared for a second and gave way to an image. It was my living room. The same space where I was, with the couch, the table, the kitchen in the background. But without me in it, the image was still like a fixed camera, and it lasted only a few seconds before going back to static. I froze immediately. I stood there staring at the screen, trying to understand what I had just seen. My brain immediately tried to rationalize it, thinking it could be some kind of signal interference, maybe a channel picking up an image from somewhere else. But that didn't make sense. It was exactly my living room. The same angle, the same arrangement of everything. And the worst part, it seemed to come from a high point, like a camera positioned near the ceiling. I took a step back without realizing it. My heart was already racing, and I started looking around at the ceiling, the walls, as if I would find something installed there. I had never installed any camera inside the apartment. Never, no sensor, nothing. And there was nothing visible. No device, no light, nothing to justify that image. Even so, the feeling that I was being watched at that moment became very strong. I spent a few seconds looking at the ceiling, then the walls, trying to identify anything out of place. Nothing. Everything looked exactly as it always had. I looked back at the TV, and the static was still there, as if nothing had happened. But now the sound seemed louder, more disturbing. It wasn't just the volume. It was the feeling that it shouldn't be happening. I thought about unplugging it, so I stepped closer and went behind the stand. As I leaned down, I heard a faint sound coming from the living room itself, but not from the TV. It was quick, like a shift of weight on the floor, as if someone had moved, somewhere else in the room. I froze in position, not completing the movement, trying to listen better. I stayed there, half bent, trying to identify where the sound had come from. My entire body tensed, and I even stopped breathing for a few seconds to hear better. Nothing. No footsteps, no dragging, no sign of movement. Just the static noise filling the space. Even so, I couldn't shake it. It felt too specific to be imagination. I stood up slowly and looked around again, this time more carefully. The living room was small. Not many places for someone to hide. The couch, the table, the kitchen entrance, everything visible. And still the feeling didn't go away. I looked back at the TV, and that's when the image changed again. The static cut abruptly once more, and the image returned. The same living room, the same high angle looking down at everything. But this time, I was in the image, standing in the middle of the room, looking at the TV. What made me freeze was that it wasn't exactly real time. There was a slight delay. I could tell because on the screen I was still finishing standing up, while in reality I was already standing still, staring. That gave me a really bad feeling, because it meant it wasn't just a random image. It was showing what was happening there inside my apartment. I couldn't move for a few seconds. I just stood there watching, trying to follow my own movement on the screen, and then without warning the image froze for a moment and went back to static. A strong chill ran through my entire body. This was no longer something I could explain in a simple way. I took a few steps back, moving away from the TV without taking my eyes off it. My mind started racing, trying to find any technical explanation, any malfunction that could cause something like that. But nothing fit. There was no camera, no monitoring system, nothing that could justify that coming from inside my own apartment. That's when I noticed something else. As I moved around the living room looking around, the image didn't return. Only static, as if it only appeared at specific moments. I started paying attention to that. I stood still for a few seconds, nothing. Moved a little, nothing. And that made me even more nervous because it didn't seem automatic. It seemed controlled. I stood there trying to understand if it was reacting to something I did. I took a few more steps around the room, went into the kitchen, came back. Nothing on the screen except static. Just that constant noise. But the feeling that it could come back at any moment wouldn't leave my mind. I started paying attention to the environment differently, as if trying to notice something I would normally ignore. Every small sound, every variation in the light from the screen, everything felt more intense. That's when I noticed a detail that made me stop again. The light from the TV was illuminating the side wall of the living room. and for a second I thought I saw movement there. Not on the screen, but on the wall itself. A very subtle shift in the shadow. I quickly turned my head in that direction, but didn't see anything immediately. Even so, it was enough to make my body freeze again, because it didn't seem to come from the TV. I stared at the wall for a few seconds, trying to see if that movement would happen again. Nothing. Just the flickering light of the TV reflecting there, creating irregular shadows. I started thinking it could just be an effect of the static itself, some kind of illusion caused by the flickering light. But even trying to convince myself of that, the feeling didn't go away. On the contrary, it felt like it was getting worse. I slowly turned to look at the entire room again, and that's when I heard a sound behind me. Not from the TV, not from the kitchen. Closer. A faint sound like a restrained step, very near. I turned quickly, almost by reflex, looking straight at the space behind the couch. There was no one. Nothing out of place. But I was sure I had heard something. I stood there staring at the space behind the couch, waiting for any other sign. My whole body was on alert, like anything could happen at any moment. And then, without warning, the TV changed again. I looked at it instantly. The image returned. The same view of the living room from above. But this time, it wasn't just me in the image. There was something else there. On the screen, you could clearly see the living room. And behind me, near the couch, there was a shape. You couldn't see a face, couldn't distinguish clothing, but it was a presence. Something occupying that space that, in reality, was empty. And the worst part was that it also seemed to have a slight delay compared to what was actually happening, like it was a few seconds behind me. My body didn't react immediately. I was completely frozen, staring at the screen, trying to understand if that was really what I was seeing. And then in the image, the thing behind me made a small movement. A subtle shift, like someone adjusting their weight. I felt my stomach drop in that instant. Because in real life, I hadn't heard anything yet from that exact spot. I didn't turn immediately. I stared at the screen for another second, maybe two, trying to anticipate what would happen. Because if it was delayed, then what I was seeing was about to happen behind me. My whole body went rigid, like I was waiting for the exact moment. And then I heard it. A step very close, right behind me in the same spot where the image showed that shape. That's when I turned all at once, without thinking. I looked straight at the space behind the couch. There was no one. Nothing, just the same empty room as before. But the sound had been real. I heard it, I didn't stay there any longer. I unplugged the TV by pulling the cord, grabbed my keys, and left the apartment immediately. I didn't take anything except my phone. I spent the rest of the night in my car in the parking lot waiting for daylight. When I went back later during the day, the TV was off, normal as if nothing had happened. To this day, I've never been able to explain it. But what affected me the most wasn't the image on the screen. It was the fact that, for a few seconds, I was able to see something before it happened behind me. Story 5. I live in Cleveland, I'm 23 years old, and at the time I was in college and working part-time. I rented an old apartment, one of those older buildings with narrow hallways, wooden floors that creak, and heavy doors. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was cheap and close to the university, so it worked well for me. One thing I always found a bit unusual was the door lock. It was one of those that accepts a key from both sides, inside and outside. The landlord mentioned it when he gave me the place, but said it was common in older buildings. I didn't pay much attention at the time. My routine was pretty standard. I studied during the day, worked in the afternoon, and got home at night already tired. That specific day was a Thursday. I got home around 11 p.m., made something quick to eat, and spent some time on my laptop at the table in the living room. The apartment was small, so any sound echoed easily. I always locked the door with the key from the inside before going to sleep, not just turning the lock, but leaving the key there, inserted on the inside. It was a habit of mine, because I felt safer that way. I went to sleep around 1 a.m. The apartment was completely silent, as it always was at that hour. No TV on, no music, nothing. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and, occasionally, the creaking of the building's wood. I remember checking the door before lying down, as I always do. The key was there on the inside, turned, locking the door. That gave me a sense of security. I don't know exactly how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly to a very specific sound. It was the metallic sound of a key turning in the lock. It wasn't distant or unclear. It was clear, sharp, coming from my apartment door. My body reacted instantly. I opened my eyes but didn't move right away. I stayed there lying down trying to understand if it could have been some kind of dream. But it wasn't. The sound stopped as quickly as it had started. There was no follow-up, no repeated attempts. Just that clear turn and silence. I stayed lying there for a few seconds, my body completely tense, trying to hear anything else. No footsteps in the hallway, no voices, nothing. Just silence again, but now it felt different. Heavier. I got up slowly, being careful not to make noise, and walked to the door. Each step sounded louder than it should have in that silence. When I got close, I stood there for a few seconds without touching the handle, just listening. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to catch any sound from the other side. Nothing. No breathing, no movement. It didn't make sense, because the sound of the key had been too clear to be imagination. I placed my hand on the key on the inside, and it was still there, exactly where I had left it. That was the first thing that really confused me. Because if someone had turned a key from the outside, how was that possible with my key already inserted on the inside? I slowly turned mine just to test it. The sound it made was exactly the same as the one that had woken me. That confirmed I hadn't imagined anything. I took a step back, still looking at the door, trying to piece together an explanation. I thought maybe it was a noise from another apartment, something that echoed through the hallway, but it didn't seem like it. The sound had come exactly from my door. That's when a thought started to form against my will. Someone had tried to open the door, using a key. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the lock, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to just go back to the bedroom and pretend nothing had happened, but I couldn't. I needed to be sure no one was outside. I approached the door again and looked through the peephole, trying to see the hallway. The hallway was empty, just the dim ceiling light illuminating that narrow, silent space. No one standing there, no moving shadow, nothing. That should have reassured me, but it didn't, because the sound had been real. I knew it. I stayed there for a few more seconds, watching, waiting for any movement. But nothing happened. I stepped away from the door slowly, still trying to understand. I checked my phone for the time, 3:07 a.m. That didn't help at all. It was exactly the kind of hour when anything unusual feels worse. I thought about texting the landlord the next day, asking if there was a spare key or something like that. But at that moment, there wasn't much I could do except go back to the bedroom and try to sleep. I didn't sleep well after that. I kept waking up several times, always listening for any sound coming from the door. But nothing else happened that night. No more key sounds, no footsteps in the hallway. Just that constant silence until it started to get light through the window. When I finally got up, the first thing I did was go straight to the door. When I got close, the first thing I did was look at the lock, almost expecting to find everything exactly as I had left it. But something already seemed different before I even understood what it was. I bent down slightly and looked closer. And that's when I saw it. On the outside of the door, there was a key inserted. I froze instantly, because that key was identical to mine. Same shape, same type of head, even the same wear along the edges. And that made no sense at all. I had never given a copy of my key to anyone. Not a friend, not the landlord, no one. And even if someone had a copy, how was that key there, inserted on the outside, if mine had been on the inside all night? I stood there for a few seconds, staring at it without moving. My brain trying to fit a simple explanation, but nothing made sense. The key was there, fully inserted in the lock, as if someone had tried to open it and simply left it there. It wasn't dropped, it wasn't crooked, it was perfectly aligned. I looked at the hallway again, opening the door slowly this time. I glanced both ways. No one. No sign that anyone had been there recently. The silence was the same as always. I looked back at the key and with some hesitation pulled it out. The metal was cold, normal, nothing unusual, but the weight in my hand felt strange, like it didn't belong there. I brought the key inside and placed it next to mine on the table. I compared the two for a few seconds. They were practically identical. Same cut, same pattern. If not for small scratches, I would have said they were the same key. That immediately led my mind to a possibility I didn't want to consider. Someone had an exact copy of my apartment key, but even that didn't explain everything, because my key had been in the lock on the inside all night. There was no way someone could turn a key from the outside with mine there. I tested it right then. I put my key back in from the inside, went outside, and tried to insert the other one. It wouldn't go in. One blocked the other. That only made the feeling that something wasn't right even stronger. I kept trying to recreate what had happened, testing the lock several times, turning it from one side, trying the other. but nothing matched what I had heard during the night. In every attempt, when one key was in place, the other simply wouldn't fit. There was no way someone could have turned a key from the outside while mine was inside. And yet, I heard it, clear, sharp. I spent the rest of the day with that in my head. I couldn't focus on anything. I went to class, came back, but kept thinking about the same thing. When I got home that night, the first thing I did was change the position of the key, leaving it out of the lock just to test. And that night, it took me much longer to fall asleep. I lay there, staring at the door, waiting to hear anything again. At some point, I eventually fell asleep, but it was light, the kind where any noise wakes you up. And I remember exactly the moment I woke up again, because the sound came back. The same key sound. This time I didn't move right away. I stayed completely still in bed, listening. The sound was shorter than the previous night, almost like a test. A slight turn and then silence. My body froze instantly. I had no doubt this time. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't building noise. There was someone outside my door. Story 6. I live alone in a small house in the interior of Oregon. I'm 35 years old and I work from home, so I spend practically the entire day inside. It's a very quiet town, the kind where everyone knows each other, and hardly anything unusual ever happens. The house is simple, with a short hallway that connects the bedroom to the bathroom and the living room. One thing I always do before going to sleep is check everything. Doors locked, windows closed, and especially the water. I have a certain discomfort with dripping faucets or any water sound at night, so I always make sure everything is completely turned off. That night was no different. It was already past 11 when I went through my routine. I went into the bathroom, checked the shower, the sink, everything dry, everything off. The house was quiet, no strong wind, no rain, nothing. I remember pausing for a second in the hallway before going into the bedroom, just listening to the silence. That kind of stillness you get used to when living alone. I went in, closed the door, turned off the light, and lay down. I fell asleep relatively quickly. I don't know exactly how long I slept, but I woke up to a sound I recognized immediately. Water. It wasn't dripping, it wasn't pipes. It was the steady sound of a shower running. I opened my eyes, still a bit disoriented, trying to understand if it could be coming from outside, but no. It was coming from inside the house, from the bathroom in the hallway. I stayed lying there for a few seconds, completely still, trying to confirm if it was real. The sound was constant, the kind of noise that fills the silence of the entire house. And what bothered me the most was that it didn't seem like it had just started. It felt like it had already been running for some time. That made me slowly sit up in bed, already with that strange feeling in my body, like something was wrong even before I understood why. I got up slowly and carefully opened the bedroom door. The hallway was dark, with only a faint light coming from the living room window at the far end. But the sound of the shower was clear now, coming straight from the bathroom. I stood in the doorway for a few seconds just listening. My heart started to beat faster, because I was absolutely sure I had turned everything off before going to sleep. I began walking down the hallway step by step, trying not to make noise. The wooden floor made that light creaking sound under my weight, and it felt too loud in that silence. When I reached the bathroom door, it was slightly ajar, not completely closed. The light inside was on, and steam was already starting to escape from underneath the door. That made my stomach drop immediately, because it wasn't just the sound. The shower was actually on. I pushed the door open slowly, feeling the warm air rush out right away. The mirror was already starting to fog up, and the sound of water hitting the shower floor seemed even louder in there. The shower was fully open, water running strongly, and what caught my attention immediately was the temperature. The steam showed it was hot. It wasn't cold water turning on by itself due to some issue. I stood there for a few seconds, staring, trying to understand if it could have been my mistake. Maybe I hadn't turned it off properly, but that didn't make sense. I always check. Always. Even so, I stepped closer to the handle and turned it off slowly. The water stopped and the silence returned almost instantly. That's when I looked down at the floor. The bathroom floor was wet as expected, but not just near the shower. There were watermarks extending outward. They weren't random splashes. They were footprints, clear enough to distinguish the shape of wet feet, leading from the shower toward the door. My body froze instantly. I stared at them, trying to figure out if they could be mine, but they weren't. I was barefoot, but my feet were dry. The footprints continued out of the bathroom into the hallway. A cold wave ran through my entire body at that moment, because it meant one very simple thing. Someone had been there, using the shower. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to follow them or not. But the need to understand took over. I stepped out of the bathroom and began following the marks on the floor. The footprints continued along the hallway, still clearly visible on the wood. There weren't many, but enough to form a clear path. I walked slowly, looking down, trying to follow each mark. My heart was racing, and the feeling that I was not alone in that house became very strong. The silence around me felt different now, heavier, as if there was something beyond what I could see. And then the footprints began to fade, not gradually disappearing, just stopping. I stopped with them. I looked at the floor, confused, trying to find where they continued, but there was nothing. They ended exactly in front of my bedroom door. I slowly lifted my head, looking at the bedroom door. It was slightly open, exactly how I had left it when I came out. My entire body tensed at that moment, because it meant that while I was sleeping, someone or something had gone right up to it, right to my bedroom door. I stood there for a few seconds, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to just leave the house immediately, without even looking inside, but another part needed to confirm if there was something there. I pushed the door open slowly, hearing a faint creak. The bedroom was dark, exactly as I had left it. No movement, no sound. I stood in the doorway, not fully stepping in. My eyes were trying to adjust to the darkness, searching for any shape, any movement. The air inside was cold, different from the warmth of the bathroom, which made that contrast feel even stranger. I took a step inside slowly without taking my eyes off the bed, the floor, the corners, and then I noticed something that made my stomach twist instantly. The bedroom floor was dry. There were no watermarks inside, no continuation of the footprints, as if they had stopped exactly at the entrance, and whoever had been there had never actually gone in. I didn't sleep in that house that night. I left immediately and spent the rest of the early morning in my car waiting for daylight. To this day, I have no explanation for it. But the only thing that comes to mind when I remember is that the footprints weren't going away. They were coming in.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.